Welcome guys once again to a new CSS Grid tutorial video, and today I'm going to show you how to use the Grid Auto Rows property. It's a very essential property in CSS Grid because it allows you to control the sizes of rows that you've not explicitly defined or specified in your grid structure. So here what I have is an HTML structure. I have a div container and I have six grid items. I've defined a grid here with the display grid CSS declaration, and I'm using the grid gap property to have spaces in between my grid items, and I'm also using the grid template columns property to get two columns equally sized, so one FR and one FR again. So all of these I've explained how they work in some previous videos from this series, so I recommend you check my previous tutorials if you are a bit confused as to how this works. For every item, I'm applying some basic styling for the font family, color, padding, and the background color actually. So now I'm going to give you an idea. Probably I'm going to add something here, like I'm going to get a space here and I'm going to paste this multiple times, and you're going to see what will happen. Okay, so now this first row is a bit larger or bigger in terms of heights than the rows below. All right, but what if we wanted every row to be bigger naturally, even though we only have one line of text? What if we simply wanted our rows to be like 150 pixels each? So based on what I showed you in my previous video, you're probably thinking that's very easy. I just need to say grid template rows here have 150 pixels 3 times, probably even use the repeat function to say I want to apply 3 times this value, and we'll have 3 rows of 150 pixels each. That's cool. But then what happens if, for instance, we have more rows like this? In this case, let me paste it a bit more so that we have 3 rows. In this case, these new items here are not explicitly defined here. All right, the repeat function repeats the 150 pixels value 3 times. This means for our first 3 rows. But what happens to row number 4, 5, and 6? They don't have any values for them. So in this case, they have an automatic value because these are implicit grid tracks, and the heights they are assigned depends on the font size, the line height, and the padding applied. For instance, in this case, I have a padding of 10 pixels, but assuming I was to comment this out, you can see that the height reduces. So that's where grid auto rows comes really handy. In this case, I'm going to clear this out and I'm going to have grid auto rows, and I could say 150 pixels. This means this 150 pixels is going to apply to every row in this grid container. It doesn't matter if we have 1 row, 5 rows, or 100 rows. Okay, so that's fine, but let's take this a bit further. What if I wanted a sequence? Like I want the first row to be 100 pixels, the second one to be 200 pixels, the third one to be 100 pixels, the fourth one to be 200 pixels, and repeat that sequence over and over again. So probably this could be useful, let's say if you're generating some sort of unique content from a database or some sort, whatever. But let's just say, for the sake of this tutorial, that this is what we want to do. So we want 100 pixels on every odd row and 200 pixels on every other row. So we can simply state this as I have it here. So the first one here, item 1 and item 2 for the first row are 100 pixels. Item 3 and 4 are significantly bigger because they are twice the size of the first row, and so on and so forth. So we can see this sequence repeating itself. Let me make this a bit more apparent, and so you can see that this works. Now what happens if we wanted to use FRs, fractionals for the grid auto rows? I could do this simply, one FR, okay, and we have this space applied. Actually, let me remove this. I don't think we need this anymore. Alright, so now you can see that the size of all the rows has been reduced to the minimum size, which is dependent on the font size, line heights, and the padding, etc. So now 1FR doesn't do anything. What about 2FR? It does not change anything either. What about 3? Nothing. So the reason why we're not seeing any changes is because fractions, the FR units, are dependent on the space available. In this case, the available space in our container is auto. Okay, we do not have any height specified. So here I could simply solve this problem by adding the height property and giving it a value, let's say 500 pixels. In this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows and 500 pixels of height. So let's see how the grid is calculating the height of every row. In this case, the height of every row is 55 pixels plus 10 plus 10, because 10 padding is what we have top and bottom for each item. So that is 75 pixels. 75 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I'm not mistaken, this is 450 pixels. Okay, so you might be wondering, we said 500 pixels and then divide it by whatever amount of rows we have, but give them equally sized heights. So you might be saying 500 is what is supposed to be considered when determining the size of the rows, and not 450. Well, actually what we have here is 500 pixels. The other 50 pixels are being taken by the grid gaps. So we have one grid gap here between the first and second column, the second one here, third one, fourth one, and fifth one. And here we specified in our grid that we want a grid gap of 10 pixels all around, which means also 10 pixels vertically. So 10 pixels times 5 is 50, plus the 450 that we had previously is 500 pixels. So that's how it works when you use FR units for the grid auto rows. Okay, you need to define or to specify a height for your grid overall. Now what if we wanted to use percentages? We want every row to be 20%. Okay, I'm going to remove this because I don't think we need it right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep. So we're back to 3 rows. Okay, now let me say once again, or to make sure that we can see the results, actually we need to solve this problem again by specifying a height. Alright, so now we have 20% for every item and 500 pixels for the height. Now that looks smaller than the 500 pixel grid we had just earlier on. So what happened right there? We still have a grid container of 500 pixels, but then every item is taking only 20% of that grid container. So let's check if that is true. Indeed, for item 1, for instance, or item 3, it's the same thing because we're talking about the height of the rows. What we have here is 80 pixels of height plus 10 plus 10, that is 100 pixels. Okay, so what we have here is 100. The grid actually continues down here, but the space is not being taken because these 3 rows in total are only taking 60% of the size. Now if you have any trouble believing this, all we need to do is to add a background color here to verify this claim. In this case, what you see with the black background is the grid container. So this means all this space is still available. It's just not being taken by these grid items. What if I said 30%? Okay. What about 33%? All right. So you need to take into consideration all the elements involved, okay, whether it's padding and everything. Even when you define or you specify percentages, you need to probably use the inspect elements tools from your browser to make sure that whatever value you're specifying is actually the value you're getting. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to show you one last example, and I'm going to use the min-max function, which we also covered in a previous video. And in this case, I can also have min-max. So for instance, I want every row to be 100 pixels minimum, and I'm going to remove this background because we don't need it anymore. So we can say we want the minimum value to be 100 pixels for the height, and the maximum to be max contents. In this case, I think I can use auto because it's going to do the same job. So here what we have once again is a row of 100 pixels and auto for the maximum. So what does auto mean? It means rows will never go below 100 pixels, whether they're empty or not. But then if they have more contents that can be contained in 100 pixels row, then the row is going to be stretched to accommodate the content that we have. So I'm going to give you an example here, and I'm going to add 100 words, sample words of lorem ipsum. And in this case, all the text is visible. Okay, so there's a difference between having, for instance, this, where the content is being hidden because you are forcing the height of the row to be 100 pixels, and this right here, where you are having a range. Actually, the minimum is specified, but the maximum is not specified, so it depends on the size of the content you have. All right, so you probably want to use the min-max function with the grid auto rows as much as you can to ensure that whatever content you have can fit perfectly in your rows. Okay, so I think that's going to be it for this video. I'm going to make this code available in the description of this video, and I hope you learned something. If you want to learn more about CSS Grid, please subscribe to my channel because I'm going to have much more content, not only beginner tutorials but also advanced tutorials for grid layout techniques. And please like this video, please share it with your friends and all, and I'll catch you next time. All right, have a great day. Bye.